Is everyone ready? Before I begin my speech, I get my roadmap. It's going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, the counter plan, and then the disadvantage. Look at that one more time. Be advantage 1, advantage 2, counter plan, and disadvantage. Everybody ready? All right. Oh, there. I'll put the timer. Sorry, one second. Okay. Start. In relation to advantage 1, their only answer is descriptive, not proscriptive. It doesn't say that HNS should stay around. I think we both use the same author, like Hirota and 06, right? It just says what we could do with host nation support if we were to reduce it by certain amounts. What we're saying is that we should reduce it by the 100% amount, which even your author says is the best case scenario. But also, specifically, HNS could be reallocated to domestic disaster relief, Sabata and 11. The total amount of HNS and related costs for using U.S. FJ amounts to 5.6 trillion yen. For many Japanese people, this payment cannot be accepted, particularly for victims of the Great East Japan earthquake. Japan now faces serious emergency. So the government should save all the expenses, including HNS. There should be no exception. Japan requires a tremendous amount of money to recover from this unprecedented catastrophe. Nevertheless, Japanese government gives USFJ priority over victims of the disaster. Victims of the disaster live in temporary houses, while USFJ members comfortably live in large houses with air conditioning, provided with the victims' tasks. Also, moving on to advantage 2. Just because the crime rate is low does not mean that U.S. service people aren't causing more harm. Our evidence indicates that U.S. soldiers are convicted at a much less rate. We think that that is the most important fact, right? It's not about whether Japanese people are committing more crimes. It's about who's being put in jail and held accountable for those crimes. Captain Fisher, victim of rape in Okinawa, speaks out, quote, "For the past 70 years, U.S. military servicemen have been raping, murdering, committing crimes against Okinawans. Nobody was speaking out about it because the servicemen had received immunity," end quote. We think that's really, really important. And ultimately what we're saying is that like the people in Okinawa shouldn't be a cost of war or a cost of security for Japan. We think that that's something that's morally repugnant and shouldn't be held under these standards, right? We think that that's something that needs to be solved, absolutely, and the people in Okinawa also think so. We think that they also did not answer the fact that like it's causing tension with China, which leads to a much bigger scenario in the future, thus like causing their dissent. But let's go to the counterplan. So, eliminating the treaty would lead to the demilitarization of East Asia. The counterplan can't solve. Kazuo and 12. Japan will be able to start a move towards disarmament in East Asia only by ending the Japan-U.S. security treaty. Having 50,000 U.S. troops leave Japan would constitute a major disarmament step. Only by abrogating the Japan-U.S. security treaty and removing the U.S. troops in Japan, which is the biggest source of regional tension, we can call on other East Asian countries, including China, to work together to shift away from military buildup to disarmament. Thus, Japan will be able to introduce peace initiative in line with Article 9. This will certainly be a historic turning point for the peace and stability of East Asia. We can ensure security in Japan and East Asia after we terminate the Japan-U.S. security treaty. Also, PERM, do the plan and create a new treaty. Also, PERM, do the counterplan. The plan is an instance of the counterplan. They say in their C subcard that termination of the U.S. security treaty could result of the counterplan. We think that's really important because it's not severance or anything like that. Like the plan exists in the world of the counterplan. Also, counterplan doesn't solve advantage 1. Revision won't work to solve for host nation support. Competing interests, George Packer and 10. The American presence is governed by a Status of Forces Agreement, SOFA, which has never been ratified by the Japanese Diet, and which increasingly strikes Japanese an extension of the extraterritorial arrangements that characterized Western imperialism in Asia in the 19th century. Japan agreed to provide HNS that helps pay for the Japanese workers employed at U.S. military bases. This cost has run $3 to $4 billion per year. It is called in Japanese, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to butcher this, even though I am Japanese, Omoriari Yosan, or sympathy budget, a term which should embarrass both sides. Japan seeks to reduce the budget, and the United States seeks to enlarge it. We think that these competing interests don't work out. Right. Also, the counterplan does not solve advantage 2. Okinawa houses 75% of American bases. It's the most important site of military presence in the Pacific for the United States. No negative evidence states that the United States will be willing to lose such an important strategic location in any meaningful way. Also, the counterplan links to the dissent. Japan revising the treaty would also be seen as a sign of weakness and open it up to attack. Prefer the permutation which shows the strength of Japanese diplomacy and asserts the strength of the SDF. Ultimately, that's the answer to revising the counterplan. So let's move on to the dissent. I think my partner did an effective job in cross-examination of showing why the treaty isn't the only form of cooperation that can exist. But also, as we're talking about, I think that the counterplan links to the disadvantage because it could end in the termination of the security treaty. So either way, like both sides are subject to this disadvantage no matter what. What we're saying is that we can solve for the economy and we can solve for Okinawan human rights, which we think are also really, really important. We don't think that the counterplan could solve for either of those things. Also, there's no link or impact evidence or analysis on the disadvantage. We think that that's really, really important at the point where we don't know what type of security threat Japan would be seen to come under attack. Like, they don't give you a specific scenario about North Korea cyber attacks or China being aggressive in the Senkaku Islands, right? It's all this kind of really divisive rhetoric that just says that Japan could come under a threat, like the DoD is necessary. This is the exact same type of rhetoric that the United States military has used to oppress people in Okinawa, to take money from the Japanese economy, and to oppress poor indigenous people all across Japan. We think that that's really important, and we're proud to negate. Open for a cross-out. Oh, affirm, sorry. We're affirming.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Firstly, as for your counterplan, please explain your first refutation.
Yeah, the first refutation to the counterplan is that eliminating the treaty is one of the first steps to demilitarizing Japan, or to demilitarizing East Asia overall. Because 50,000 troops leaving Japan will be seen as a sign that Japan is willing to cooperate rather than to have tension with countries like China or North Korea.
I see. So you want to say as long as the base of such U.S. troops exist in Japan, it's bad?
Yes, absolutely. And it's the only way, I mean, our card literally says we can ensure security in Japan and East Asia after we terminate the treaty.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Then as for the disadvantage, maybe your first argument, you said not only the U.S. protection, but also that there's other protections, such as with China or North Korea.
No, I think our point was that the Japan-U.S. security treaty isn't the only way that countries like the United States can cooperate with Japan. We think that they can cooperate outside the guise of a treaty that is much, much more favorable to the United States than it is to Japan in the status quo.
Oh, I see. Then, which evidence supports that we can actually achieve maybe the same quality or the same effectiveness there?
I mean, ultimately, I think the counter-positive has to be true. Like, you need to show a scenario in which the quality of protection is going to suffer to such a great extent that it outweighs the advantages that are garnered by the affirmative. In the case that you all don't have the impact evidence there, I think it's reasonable to assume that the economy will get better and Okinawa's human rights being better is a better advantage, or two better advantages.
So you want to say our impact of disadvantage is very vague, so we should prioritize such actual impact in the Okinawa?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see a specific scenario or any impact evidence as to what's going to happen if we terminate the treaty.
I understand, thank you. That's all, thank you.
Thanks.